right. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. All right. Let's see if we can, let's see if everybody can hear me out there. All right, great. Great. I think we have a few people out there. I'm going to wait a few more minutes and see if, because I wanted to start at 8 o'clock. I'm glad you can hear me. We're going to be talking about a lot of information tonight. So Elton, did you attend the previous webinars? Oh, okay, great. Okay, so we looked in some of the previous webinars regarding the federal job series number and the job series title. All right, so if you have a job series number and a job series title, then please type it in, and I'll try to use a few of those tonight as we're going through the webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat block on the right-hand side. And this is a free-flowing webinar. It's live, YouTube Live, so it's great because I really embrace live webinars. And if you have a question, if you are going through the websites like I would recommend, as I go through the different websites, I would recommend you go through the websites as well. And if you have questions as you're going through them, trying to find your own federal job series, trying to write your own resume, any question you have, please type it in so I can answer it. And if I don't see it, please type it in, so I continue to look at it. I'm going to continue to look at the chat block and answer as many questions as I can tonight. I mean, that's the key to the entire webinar series. Look, this is a free series. I'm doing 5 of these webinars, and it's for the federal resume. And so, what I'm trying to do is provide a service to everybody. The federal resume writing process and the employment process is challenging at best. It's very stressful. It's confusing if you're not familiar with it. So I try to interpret that process into battlefield methodology. And so it makes it a little easier for me when I translate it into something that I'm familiar with. So for me, I'm a retired military guy, but anybody that served in the military or anybody who has worked with the military, the way I teach will be very intuitive for you because it's a battlefield. And I call the resume a battlefield. I call the civilian workforce, the actual process to get employed, the war. And I look at key terrain. I look at it like an S2 intel officer would. So we kind of do a war gaming between the S2 and the S3. And that's kind of how the battlefield resume methodology works. So before I get started, we have a few viewers out there right now. Can you please type in your name and any questions that you may have right now, and then I can focus the webinar in that direction. All right, please ask any of your questions, and then I'll move right in because it's 8:02. I like to start on time, and we will see what we can do. All right. Yeah, I have quite a few people that normally watch. Right now we have 6 watching, and but I actually had 50 or 60 that signed up tonight, and yeah, and so if you can receive YouTube, hopefully you can watch the video. If not, I'm not sure what the problem is because it's on YouTube. So if you don't have any questions, we'll move right into the webinar. All right, so let me move this around a little bit. Okie dokie. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about USAJOBS 401, which is the resume. Now, 101 was trying to locate your job series number and your job title. All right. 201, we moved into analyzing job announcements. 301, which was last week, we actually went into separating, isolating, and exploiting the keywords in the job announcements. So this week, what we're going to talk about is the actual resume. So it's going to be very interesting. And I've got a couple examples, and if you have examples, please let me know. We're going to go through a couple examples tonight, but I am going to show you how to actually write the resume. It's very, very simple once you learn the system, but it's a lot different than what you've probably always been told. All right, and so let's move right in. So as you can see, we're doing 401, and okay, and just a little information here, and that is everything that we cover tonight is actually going to be located under on-demand recordings. All right, it'll be on my on-demand page, and you can find that under the resource pages of my website. Also, everything that we're going to talk about tonight can be located in my federal resume writing workbook. All right, just so everyone knows, it's all coming straight out of there. And those 2 elements. Now, the job searching, we've already gone through, so that was basically 301. 101, 201, a little bit of 301. 301 goes into all these other ones. 401 really concentrates on the workbook. This recording and all the other workbooks will actually be uploaded into my on-demand system in all my recordings. All right? And really, they're only like 99 cents a piece for the whole hour. All right, so as we move down, now the agenda, one thing that you have to kind of understand when you're working with a federal resume is that it's really an application process. So you can't think of the federal resume as an actual resume. You have to kind of think of it as an application. And, if you think about that, it's going to be a little different, right? So a resume, you would think maybe 1 page, maybe 2-page resume, your work history, things like that, describing your experience, just like my mission up there. The problem is it's more complicated than that. The job announcements are extremely, extremely lengthy. If you were to cut and paste the job announcements into a Word document, you'd probably have 10 pages just for the job announcement. And so sometimes it's overwhelming and a little intimidating. And most of us, if you're like me, you apply to these jobs and maybe you automatically, like I have in the past, get turned down. And you're qualified for the job. Well, why is that? You didn't even make it past the first stage of the process. A lot of times what you think initially is that you didn't pass the computer screening. Well, I will tell you that having worked for years with federal resumes, if there's a computer screening out there, it's minimal. There's always somebody that I know that's looking at those resumes. The challenge is a lot of the people at the initial stages of the review process are not subject matter experts in your field. All right, so it's nothing against them. They're a subject matter expert in their field. They're just not a subject matter expert in your field. So if you think about this, there's, let's say, 400 or 500, and there's probably more than that, federal job series out there. And you are in the office that has to review all of those resumes. So if you were to receive all of the job vacancy announcements that are listed on USA Jobs for your organization and all of the resumes associated with those, could you do that? And then if you could, how would you do that? Because you're not a subject matter expert in anything except for your skill set. So how are you going to review someone else's resume against the job announcement and determine whether they should be seen by the hiring manager, a subject matter expert in that field? So if you look at it from that perspective, that's the S2 perspective. You're looking at it from, I say it's the enemy's side, but it's the other side, right? It's offense and defense, right? You're like the offense and defense. You're the scout that goes out and looks at the other team before you play them. All right? In the military, that's the S2. What's the other team doing, and how are they going to look at us? Now, our team is the S3. So you and your resume is the S3. You're moving forward. You know your direction. You're going to describe your experience as you know it. What you need to figure out, though, is how is it going to be reviewed? And so the combination of those two elements we call a war game. All right, it's no different than if you were doing a rock drill, if you were practicing any type of war game. That's what it is. So what I've done is I've really deduced this down into 4 objectives during tonight's webinar. And we may go over a lot of my webinars. I schedule for an hour. Normally they're an hour and a half. And if you have questions, they're maybe longer than that. So, but that's fine. It's about you, and it's about answering your questions and making this process as easy as possible and as intuitive as possible. So I've broken this down into 4 objectives. One is the application process. How your enemy views you. So how the process, how is your resume reviewed during the screening, the certain phases of the screening process? Because there's multiple phases. The next we're going to go into is the targeted federal resume. Now I differentiate between targeted and tailored. Targeted means a specific job announcement. So if you are applying, which you will see on this webinar, applying to one particular job, which that's what we do, you're targeting that job. Now, if you haven't tailored your resume for the job you're targeting, that's a problem. So you have to tailor your resume for the target. For instance, let's put this into perspective. If you're going to the range and you're firing your weapon, what is your target? You have one target, and it's about 100 meters down the range. That is your target. Center mass on that target is really the target. So that's your target. Now, what are you going to do to try to hit the target? You're going to try to zero your weapon. So the association here is you have to zero your resume. All right, your target is the job you're applying to, but you have to zero your resume for the target, no different than zeroing your weapon for the target downrange. It's the same thing. You have to think of it that way. All right, so whenever somebody advises you and they say you need to target your resume, ask them what that means, and they probably won't have an answer. My answer is just like I told you. That's the target. You have to focus on that target. You have to tailor your resume, basically zeroing your resume to that target. All right, now at the very end, you have to assess where you are. And how do we do that? Basically, the feedback you receive from those who have reviewed your resume. And so when the HR office or when the organization sends you an email back that says you're not qualified, then what is that actually telling you? Because what the problem is either you won't receive any feedback for some reason, and that just happens. Now, I'm not here to speak negatively on the system. Look, for me, it's a battlefield, no different than any country that we're not familiar with, but that we go into for war. You just accept the country for the way it is, and you try to understand it the best you can. So that's what we do with the federal hiring process. Don't try to make sense out of it. Just figure it out and work the system that's there. Okay, just accept it. Don't let it aggravate you. So then the problem, though, is when they send you a reply back that says, hey, you're not qualified. You weren't selected because you weren't qualified. What is that actually telling you? And so I'm going to show you what that's telling you. Because you have to know where you are in order to know where you're going. Remember, in that phase, that objective, you have to think of yourself as going through land navigation. If you're in a land nav course at night, like I was in Fort Benning during OCS, and you're not allowed to talk to anybody or ask for help, however, because it's night land nav, if you forget where you're at, if you just can't find it, you gotta ask somebody. So we were allowed to do that. So here I am in the middle of the night. I lost my place. Well, if you lose your place between the last point and the point you're going to, you're really lost because it's hard to do land association, right? You can't associate anything because everything's dark. And so I had to know where I was in order to know where I was going. And so I had, thank God, a ranger who walked by, and I'm like, dude, where am I? Because you got to know where you're at. This guy was experienced. And look, I'm OCS. I was in for 10 years. I knew how to land nav. But I had to ask for help from an expert. This guy sits down in less than a minute, says, this is the point on the map, this huge map of Fort Benning. This is where we are right now. That's all I needed. All right? And that was legal. So everybody knows that's legal, right? We could do that. That was the rule back then. And so now that I know where I'm at, now I know how to get to where I'm going. But if I don't even know where I'm at in that whole forest of Fort Benning, I'm just lost. So thank goodness I spoke to that individual and he could help me. Thank God for the Rangers that night. And so sometimes you just don't know. So what I'm here to tell you is in Objective 4, I'm going to try to show you where you are in the process based on what feedback you are receiving. Okay. So we're going to go into Objective 1. And again, if anyone has any questions out there, please type them in the chat, and I'll answer them as quickly as I can. All right, so in Objective 1, what we have is, how does your enemy view you? Well, when you're talking about this, you're really talking about timelines. And on timelines, what I mean is, with the federal government, it's about 6 to 12 months to get hired on. Normally, and this is just normally, a normal federal government job, when you see it being announced and you apply to it, normally 3 months, in and around 3 months, give or take a month, is when they will conduct the interviews. At the 6-month mark is when whoever is going to be hired is getting a phone call. That's generic timeline, but you at least have to have a timeline to backwards plan. So if you're planning, your exit strategy now for departing the military and you want to get into the federal government, that's the process. If you're in a job now and you want a federal job, that's the backward planning that you're going to have to do. So now that's in a great world there. So a lot of times, it'll be extended to 6 to 12 months. All right. So that's why I put the 6 to 12 months on the slide. All right. So you have a job announcement that's advertised on USA Jobs, and that job announcement comes from a position description. It's extracted from the position description that's evaluated. That's how that works. And like I said before, if you know how they've evaluated the job description, the position description, then you know how your resume is going to be reviewed by in the job, for the job announcement. And we will go over that next week on the last phase. When I start going into the OPM piece, that's what I'm covering, the position description piece. But the formatting of the resume, remember, it's more of an application than it is a resume. But there's key elements that you have to have. My recommendation always is, if you're applying to a federal job, always use the USAJOBS Resume Builder or the organization that you're applying to. Like if you're going to apply to a CIA job, use their Resume Builder. If you're going to apply to NSA, use their Resume Builder. Some of the jobs that are announced on USAJOBS will divert you into another organization. Like, let's say you're going to apply to maybe the Coast Guard. Well, maybe the Coast Guard advertises on USAJOBS, but it will divert you to the Coast Guard website potentially. Then I would recommend using their Resume Builder. For this example tonight, we're just going to talk about the webinar. We're just going to talk about USA and applying to jobs on USAJOBS. Use their Resume Builder. Why? Because you won't forget anything that's required. So you'll submit your application, and when you submit your application, there's certain screening processes that they go through. So when you go through the initial HR screening, what are they looking at? Required documents, the questionnaire answers, and how much time in your job have you held, all that kind of information. All right. Now, in a regular resume that you've uploaded, you probably didn't put hours per week. Well, the USAJOBS Resume Builder guarantees it. You have to have it before you move on. All right, all those red asterisks that you see. So, plain English, just use the Resume Builder that USAJOBS has, and at least you'll have the minimum required areas that are normally not put into a normal resume. So, if you're submitting a regular resume into USAJOBS right now, and your resume or your application is getting immediately turned down for jobs you know you're qualified for, more than likely it's because of the format that you're using in your resume. Change that format to a USAJOBS Resume Builder format, and you will probably see greater success. Now, on the slideshow here, we're talking about USAJOBS and the process. So really what happens is you submit a job onto USAJOBS. You submit your resume, You go through the screening process, right? Your resume goes through did you have the required documents submitted? Did you answer the questionnaires, appropriately, like we did last week? We talked about that. Then the HR office evaluates, did you write to the KSAs? And you see I have the KSAs highlighted here. Did you write to the KSAs directly? If you didn't, then that's a problem. This is how they're evaluating you. And you may ask, well, what are the KSAs? So we're gonna get to that here in a second. Then if you did, and you scored higher than other people, you're going to get referred to the hiring manager. Around 10 people may get referred, 7 to 10. So then the hiring manager will evaluate your resume based on the KSAs as well. All right. And then only maybe 5 people will be interviewed. And then after that, maybe only up to 3 people could be asked. Okay, so there's only first, second, and third place after the interview. There's no fourth place. So when we get in, now let's go down to the application process. Okay, this is how it's graded. So we're going to see this next week based on the point system. So you have to write your resume based on the KSAs. The KSAs come directly out of the job position description, which is graded by this point system. So on the left-hand side, now let me see if I can point to it. Yeah, no. So the left-hand side, you can see where, like I've highlighted in red, the GS13 down here, all right, is this points, the point system on the right-hand side. How do you do that? That's what we're going to hit. So screening, automated screening, maybe. It's optional. Screening factors, everything's based on, you got it, KSAs. KSAs can be interpreted as basically the competencies for that position. Now, when you're writing your resume, what do you focus on? Again, if you've been with me, we focus on the 4-digit code. This one's 0080. We focus on the closing date. We say it's 12 noon. That's your timeline. 12 noon on the closing date. You can go through the job description requirements questionnaire, but again, I'm just reiterating how important KSAs are. If you go into a position and you look at the specialized experience, it talks about the competencies that you need. Those have the keywords that you need in your resume. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go to a job announcement. All right, so we're going to look at this job announcement, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. All right, so this is a job announcement that was posted.